Hi, everyone. So we're here, COP26. We find ourselves at a crossroads really as a species and really how to measure how far we've actually come. So the next couple of days, it's going to be about goal setting, measuring those goals, and really just getting a sense realistically of what is possible, what should be possible, what we can do. So just to get a sense really from a business, from the markets, and just capitalism perspective here on how you really allocate capital. We're joined here by Laura Cha. She's the chair at Hong Kong Exchanges. So I guess let's start off by something very simple. COP26, what are your expectations?
I certainly hope that this time there will not just be very vague agreement. We should have concrete plans and timeline. It is really time for action. Climate environment doesn't wait for us. And we have seen in the last years the disasters, the natural disaster, the increase in temperature, etc. We really have to have an action plan. I very much hope that COP26 will come up with some concrete plans.
Everyone seems to agree that there needs to be ambitious commitments.
Right.
What those commitments are, then you get disagreements between the countries.
Yes.
Especially the sort of larger developing countries like India and China, for example, who are the biggest emitters as we speak.
Yes.
How do you think the world should divvy up commitments, especially when they look at Asia?
I think Asia is a complicated case because one, we have the largest population globally, and secondly, we have economies in different stages of development. And countries such as China, Japan, and South Korea have each made their commitment to reach net zero by 2060 in the case of China, 2050 in the case of Japan and South Korea. But some of the smaller and developing economies perhaps are unable to, at this stage, to make that commitment because of their development need. So I think there has to be, as we say, the term that has been commonly used, and I personally agree, is common but differentiated responsibilities. And that means that some of the countries, some of the economies may have a larger role, and they are able to do that, and there will have to be a multitude of different options and different timelines, but the goal has to be a uniform one, has to be on a united front. Everybody has to be in the game, and depending on one situation, the timeline might be slightly varied.
And certainly these things move in cycles. There's a longer-term cycle, there's a short-term cycle. And I guess going back to the earlier point, where is it fair to place the same burden, say, on Asia-Pacific developing economies on that people are placing on developing? A very good example, China has a target.
Yes.
But then now they're having to scramble to find coal because there's a power shortage.
Exactly.
Similar with India. How should we approach that dilemma?
Well, it's not easy, certainly, it's not just we can't look at climate and pollution and supply, etc., in a single facet. It also involves the livelihood, the alleviation of SME, right? So there's necessarily different expectation, but the important thing is everybody should do something.
The concept then of stakeholder interests and shareholder interests, right? And the ideal scenario is both those two things are the same thing.
Not quite the same, but I think stakeholder interests include shareholder interests.
Okay.
But whereas shareholder interest is much more one-dimensional, stakeholder embraces a lot more. Yeah.
Well, what I was trying to get to your point, does one have to be at the cost of the other?
No.
Can they coexist?
Yes, I believe so. Actually, I think stakeholder capitalism, if one could use that word, is good for shareholders as well, because you will see the return, and at the end of the day, the investors will choose which are the companies that are doing good things for the community in addition to just making money, because just making profit had its cost too. I've seen companies where you have to think about the waste disposal, the source of your raw material, and all of this goes hand in hand with the stakeholder interest in the sense that it is the community, it is your employee to start. I often said that a company is nothing without its people. So they are not your shareholders, but they are your stakeholder, a very major part. So I think in the pandemic situation, it comes out very clearly which are the company that really take to heart and care about their employees.
How about the role of boards?
The role of board is an interesting one. I think the board's role is to set the agenda.
Okay.
And it has to come from the top. The significance that a company attached, really the direction given by the board. And of course, the senior management has to believe in it as well. So the board agenda is generally agreed between the senior management, the CEO, and the board. And so there is a common goal, as an agreed goal that one can pursue.
That takes us now into your role as an exchange, because
Yes.
you deal with a lot of boards and companies that do want to list. Well, I guess start off with very simple. How do you define ESG investing? It's tricky, I know it's quite broad.
Investing, you mean from an investor's point of view?
From an investor's point of view,
From an investor's point of view, I think I would look at the, depending on the industry.
Okay.
Some industry, you want to look at how they deal with the environment from this packaging. Let's say a manufacturing company is packaging and how it reached the consumer, its distribution channel, and whether the food, the product they produce is healthy, good for the environment. That kind of, the goodness aspect. Now, that again, depending on the industry. If you're talking about transport, then of course it is the transition into the renewable. And that has a different agenda than a manufacturing company for consumer goods, for example. So it really depends. At the end of the day, I think it's the institutional investors have a big role to play because they will determine which company has done what is needed. And then, of course, if we're talking about some of the SMEs, they probably don't have as many institutional investors, but the community will judge in that way as well.
And the role of the exchange, I guess, in collecting that information, disclosures, that sort of thing. Because a lot of the investment decisions, part of that would be based on what you're able then to ask these companies for.
That's right. I think the Hong Kong Exchange has been on a journey. We started 2013, we provide guidelines for ESG disclosure. 2017, we make it mandatory. It's a rule change. It's a listing rule requiring companies to comply or disclose. And gradually, we are increasing what needs to be disclosed. I think what the effect of that is that the awareness has been raised. And that's the first step. And people are much more concerned about what they can do in ESG. And it's no longer just a good talk and check the box. We really want to see action.
How do we define non-compliance? And as an exchange, what do you do about non-compliance?
As an exchange, with regard to non-compliance, it's a breach of the listing rule as a start.
Okay.
But the difficulty, to be perfectly candid, is that we have to first define what is compliance.
Right.
And the define compliance is not easy when we do not have a universal set of standards and requirements. So it's very difficult. You say that they don't comply, but they say that we comply in certain aspects. So right now, it is not an ideal situation.
Right.
And I hope that, there will be a universal set of taxonomy and standards and requirement for different industry. We recognize that different industry might have a different kind of path, and at least with something that we can measure against, which is comparable. We will be comparing oranges with oranges and apples with apple, rather than right now it's a whole basket. Some people comply certain things and not the other, and how do we evaluate? And I think that is, once you have that compliance, then you know what are non-compliance.
Okay, well, I guess part of this, not directly under it, is would the HKEX at some point be prepared to require companies to have a net zero carbon emissions target to be able to raise money at the exchange?
I don't yet think that it is currently being discussed, but I think maybe eventually we will reach there. To require listed company to meet net zero, it's a very big requirement because each company, again, as I said, different industry have different pathways, and it is better something that the companies come up themselves. And the way that the company comes up is when the government have set a target, then they cannot they could only exceed the government's target and not behind the government's target. So having a country making that public commitment is already a step ahead.
Right.
I don't think that the exchange will specifically require a certain date.
I know this is theoretical, obviously, because it's not happening at this point, but how would that, say, affect a company like the HKEX, where there are many companies from different parts of the world that come to list here in Hong Kong? I mean, whose rule do you follow, I guess, is the question. And how do you come up with those rules?
Well, first of all, the listing rule has to be ours. Any company that comes will have to satisfy our listing rules. So if you're talking about ESG requirements, then at the moment is as a disclosure. And you have to tell people so that the investors at least have that data.
Okay. Now, the broadening the conversation out to fossil fuel industry, for example, and the polluters, as the activists like to call them. At some point, do we need to start talking about not preventing them from raising money, but discouraging listings that go into polluting industries and fossil fuels?
I think the first is that we can see that some financial institutions are withdrawing their financing for the big polluter, for the fossil fuel companies. So that would make raising capital not an easy one. And then at the end of the day, companies that come to list would have to need to have good financials in order to be able to list. So that will reflect on their financial. And then the other thing is that it's not just the exchange role is not just to stop these polluting companies, but to encourage the renewable, to encourage the innovative technology that come to the market, to raise funds, to help to make, for example, give you two examples, it's the solar panels and wind turbines. China now is the world's largest producer in both categories. And there are companies that are listed on our market. We hope to see more to help them raise the fund, to help their technology, to improve on their technology, to make, for example, wind turbine more efficient, cheaper to produce, and therefore more available. And that is the way where the exchange, as a capital raising center, can help with the entire transition to non-renewable. It's to prevent the polluter is only a small part. The more positive and constructive is really to encourage the renewable and to help with the innovative technology.
Well, would you then theoretically, loosen or lower the standards for listing for these companies, just so they're easier and it's easier for them to access the capital? Because a lot of these technologies, for example, are either very expensive or still very experimental. So there is that hurdle first of profitability that may not even be there yet at the start.
Yes, I absolutely accept that. We already have a chapter on biotech companies, and that is a start. And perhaps, we could consider in the future about other innovative companies as well. Currently, the pre-revenue company, the listed requirement for the pre-revenue is only limited to biotech companies.
Okay, and perhaps in the future, more sector?
Yes.
Any timeline to that?
I don't have any timeline at the moment. Yeah.
Hopefully soon. We need to be a little bit ambitious. The roles of regulators in being able to police and make sure that companies stick to their targets, and this goes into greenwashing, and how do you prevent people from calling what they do green?
Yes.
Because it goes beyond what you do. So in Hong Kong, does the SFC, for example, have a role in all of this?
Well, definitely. There is a at the government level, there is a cross-department working group that involves the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the SFC, ourselves, and the Financial Bureau as well. and that is on ESG as a whole, and on what we can do in terms of sustainable sustainable finance, green finance, etc. So there is a across the board collaboration and a big push generally for Hong Kong, in Hong Kong.
And as a place where Hong Kong has raised billions and billions and billions of dollars for many companies or many industries. And back to your earlier point, we need to do this sustainably.
Yes.
Because change doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
How does the financial services industry slowly disengage from polluting industries?
It has started with the financial institution of the bank. Not completely disengage. You have to remember that, everything has...
It is a strong word, disengage.
You have to gradually move along that line. Now, financing for them, for the polluting industry is more expensive already. Okay. But one have to balance. If it is more expensive, some of the poorer developing economy, the poorer people in the lower strata might suffer. They may not be able to get electricity as cheaply. So you really have to balance. You cannot completely disengage in the sense that if we do not let the institutions finance them, they will find other ways and it will be more expensive. Is it better or worse for the underprivileged, the underdeveloped economies? So really, it's not that straightforward. And so I feel, how do we encourage that? It has to be a process, and in the end, the larger institution investors certainly has a role. They allocate, I know that some of them already allocate part of their portfolio to sustainable products. So necessarily they have to remove some. So gradually it will be market force as well as government policy that will help move that in the right direction.
It does feel that we are moving in the right direction. I mean, you have the big asset managers really having a big part of their portfolios already in there.
Yeah.
Well, the other risk to that, and the downfall so far, and it's a minor one, is that proceeds, for example, of green bonds.
Yes.
Some of them have found themselves not into green projects. How do you police against that then from an exchange point of view?
That is the same as any other company that raised the capital and say they want to use it for a certain project, and at the end it didn't end up in a certain project. Okay. So it's the same, right? But in this case, it's the green, whether we call it greenwashing or really not using it for the right thing. There is, mechanism, there are enforcement issues, there are disclosure issues, and at the end of the day, it's the accounting firms have to disclose in the annual report how the funds have been used, and it's from there that one can take action.
Final thoughts to government leaders, corporate leaders that are embarking on this, setting their agenda. What do they need to keep in mind?
I think most importantly is that we have to be on a united front. We cannot have different countries have different objective. The agenda should be the same. The pathway may be different, but the agenda, the goal has to be the same. And
you believe in climate change, right?
Definitely.
Okay. Just want to be sure. Laura Chia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
HKEX Chair there. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you guys next time.